Your strike, is it just about the 92 billion naira you're being owed as end allowances?
No. The strike is about implementation of the 2009 agreement we signed with government.
So if the federal government was to cough out 92 billion naira and give to Asuu today, would Asuu call off the strike?
No, we will not. Government has to implement the other components of the agreement. Yeah.
Now, I also want to ask you, I've been looking at the 2013 budget for education, and you look at the issue of recurrent, it's quite high. What is voted for capital is just around 60 billion, and that 60 billion is what is expected to be shared by all the public universities, polytechnics, including the Federal Ministry of Education and all of that. No doubt the money is so abysmal, and I can understand why you're asking. But are you not also doing something by telling the government to do something about the rising recurrent budget?
Well, what is going to cause the rise in recurrent budget? You see, the problem with our country and our policies are that these are policies that are churned out by IMF and World Bank. The envelope system of budgeting that we are operating in this country had never helped any country. So the problem is that IMF and World Bank tell you what goes into any sector of the economy. But we also know that UNESCO stipulated that for any country to achieve some meaningful development, it must set aside at least 26% of its annual budget and put it in education. What we have been putting in education for the last how many years, since 2000, had been about 7 to 8%, which is terribly lower than...
But realistically speaking, do you think the government can afford to set aside 26% of the nation's budget every year, which would be coming up to about, if you were to take the current budget of 4.9 trillion, for instance, that would be coming up to about 1.7 to 1.6 trillion naira. You think the government can do that every year?
Just answer that. Ghana had been spending around 30% of its annual budget on education. So little wonder that our students and our lecturers are migrating to Ghana for education. Don't we want to address that problem? What is wrong with budgeting appropriately for education? And I thought that United Nations, where countries come together to make policies that will rub up positively on all the nations that are members, looked at this key issue of the role of education to national development. Recently, our president went to China to sign a number of MOUs with Chinese government, simply because the Chinese did what is right. They invested solidly on education. Nigerians are migrating to South Africa for education. South African government had been spending no less than 30% on education. So if other countries are doing, why are we saying that in Nigeria we cannot do it? In any case, which sector of the economy does not depend on highly trained, highly qualified manpower for it to progress? Give people education. You have liberated them. Even in terms of health, an educated person knows how to take care of his health better than somebody who is an illiterate.
You said something very, very crucial when you were giving your press conference there. You said the 100 billion naira that Governor Suswan has been, binding all about. Before now, we thought, and that was what Governor Suswan said, that the money actually was coming from the private sector. But you said something very important here, that 70% of that money was coming from TED Fund. That's quite surprising. Where did you get your information from?
We have people working in the technical subcommittee of that committee. And
so the bulk of that money is not coming from the private sector?
From the private sector, not at all. Not at all. I'm saying this, I know. Yeah.
Have you confronted the government with this fact?
Yes, we did. We wrote a letter to them. And we told them that unless they address this problem, we are not going to continue participating in the deliberations of that committee, because we cannot be deceived again. That's the issue.
And you also have the fact that the committee tends to give the money to the Federal Ministry of Education as well as the National Universities Commission to execute projects, build hostels.
The convener of that committee said the committee and the Ministry of Education are going to go and undertake due process. Who normally undertakes due process? Is it not the Tenders Board? If you don't have anything with award of contracts, do you undertake the due process? You don't. It's the person who has direct control of the contract that will now go and carry out the due process. That is what we are saying. If the convener is saying that Ministry of Education will go with him to address the due process thing, it means that, see, we are intellectuals. It means that the tenders board will be between him and the Ministry of Education.
One final question, sir, before you go, because I have to let you go. Are you saying that Asuu will continue to you continue to demand that the government implements the 2009 agreement to the letter, that if the government calls you tomorrow and gives you 92 billion naira as your end allowances, you are not going to call off the strike? I'm just asking this question again for emphasis.
Our members have spoken, and that's our position. Implement the agreement. We review our earlier position.
What would be the minimum for you?
Implementation of the agreement.